Dobré odpoledne, schönen guten Nachmittag, good afternoon. Pane poslanče, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Lobkowicz Palace and to the German Embassy this afternoon. Thank you for joining us this Friday afternoon for a panel discussion on the impacts of the Russian aggression on Ukraine for the European and the international order. It has been more than a year now that we witnessed the unprovoked and brutal invasion of Russia to Ukraine. On a daily basis, we receive news about atrocities and war crimes committed by the Russian army on civilians and infrastructure. A year ago, Kiev withstood the Russian attempt to conquer the Ukrainian capital, but it paid a very high price for this, given the atrocities in Bucha and Irpin. In February this year, marking 1 year after the invasion, manifestations here in Prague and elsewhere demonstrated our continuing and strong solidarity with Ukraine. Humanitarian, financial, and military aid is continuing and is being intensified. Only this week, 18 modern Leopard tanks arrived to Ukraine from Germany, just to give you a small example. This war has dramatically changed the political landscape in Europe, hence the term Zeitenwende. It has an impact on the present and future security architecture and on our common multilateral institutions. It has also changed the debates in the Czech Republic and in Germany, in the political elites, but also within our societies. This is why today we want to take a look at these debates, and our first panel is therefore a bit retrospective, looking at the determining factors shaping these debates in Germany and in the Czech Republic. Our second panel looks a bit ahead at how this war changes our cooperation, our multilateral cooperation, and our multilateral institution and the whole architecture in Europe, because there are quite some institutions where Russia is still a member and where it sometimes can neither be ignored or expelled. My great thanks goes to our co-organizers, the DGO, German Association for East European Studies, and to the Charles University here in Prague. There are two minor changes. Sabine Fischer could unfortunately not make it because she had an accident 2 days ago, so she cannot join us, not even online. Another thing is Mr. Volker Weichsel, who was supposed to moderate the first panel, had to return from the train station this morning because of a heavy pain in his back. I think he's watching us online, so we wish you a quick recovery. This discussion is streamed and you can follow it online. And my thanks goes also to Vladimir Handel, who also kind to take over the moderation for the first panel, and I will give the floor now to him. Thank you very much for being with us, and I hope you will have an inspiring and interesting discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, perfect. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let me start with thanking Petra Dachtler, the Deputy Ambassador of German Embassy, for co-organizing this event and inviting us into this beautiful hall of German Embassy. And again, thanking Volker Weichsel and wishing him all the best, Volker, and hopefully you recover as soon as possible. It was a great cooperation, and we, of course, are very unhappy that you can't be with us. First of all, I would like to introduce my speakers, the distinguished speakers of this panel. First, I start with Ralf Fuchs. Ralf Fuchs is one of the leading Green politicians who also, and most perhaps most importantly, was the head or president or chair of the Heinrich Böll Stiftung. As you know, Heinrich Böll Stiftung is one of the party-close foundations in German political system, which focuses on issues of gender, security, environment, development. And he was the head of this Heinrich Böll Stiftung for I think, 20 years. And then 2018, he founded, together with his wife, he founded the Liberale Moderne, Zentrum für Liberale Moderne, Center for Liberal Modernity, and actually developing the discourses and activities actually continuing from the times in Heinrich-Böll-Stiftung. So, herzlich willkommen. Welcome, Ralf Fuchs, into this panel discussion. Thank you. Okay, thank you. And then Daniela Kolonovska is with the Charles University, the Institute of International Studies. She is an expert on East European history, Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and published extensively on those issues. And she is the head of the East European Department at the Institute of International Studies of the Faculty of Social Sciences, Charles University. So, Daniela, welcome.
Thank you for the invitation.
Okay, so let's start with a couple of issues, but general issues, which we would like to discuss, first of all, with our two panelists. And then, of course, we will be happy to give the floor to you, the audience, for your comments and questions. Now, for perhaps the first question, I would like to ask both our panelists, starting with Ralf, if you could elaborate a bit on those long-term trends and issues in German-Russian relations. What have been the shaping factors of the long-term relationship? We are not speaking about the current situation yet, but this rather the long-term view. What would you underline there?
Allow me, please, to start with the changes over the last 14 months since the full-fledged Russian aggression against Ukraine, because I think, like in a nutshell, you can describe the fundamental changes which are going on in German-Russian and German-Ukraine relations. You cannot separate one from another. So maybe to start with the most prominent issue, which has been a topic of debate and criticism over the last years, Nord Stream 2, from defending it until the beginning of the war to canceling it, and from a strategic energy partnership with Russia, which was one of the long lines of German energy, but also foreign policy, to almost zero imports of Russian gas, oil, and coal within a year, which is really a remarkable effort. From no weapons into war areas to heavy weapons for Ukraine, including German tanks that will face Russian soldiers for the first time since World War II. And just 2 days before, the government announced an increase in military spending for Ukraine of 12 billion euros, albeit for a period of several years. And from little knowledge but big prejudices against Ukraine to a lot of empathy and impressive solidarity by thousands of civil initiatives across Germany, sending humanitarian aid and supporting refugees from Ukraine. It was already mentioned that over the last year, around about 1 million, mainly women, kids, and elderly people came to Germany, who have been welcomed with open arms. And then regarding Russia, from European security only with Russia, which was one of the long-term dogmas and mantras of German security policy, to we have to seek security from and against Russia, which of course is a fundamental turn. And along this very fundamental change of the perception of Russia from a complicated partner to an adversary, We switched from plundering our military budget and ruining our army over the last 15 years to an extra budget of 100 billion euro for military investments over the next years. So this is a remarkable U-turn in many aspects. You could also include the relationship to China, which is part of this bigger picture. You know, the economic dependency from China is even bigger than it was from Russia, especially in terms of raw materials and high tech. And this also is starting to change, reducing strategic dependencies. So there's a new notion, I would say, in the German foreign policy debate that we are back in a kind of systemic conflict. The official term is a little less tough, systemic competition, but basically it's about a systemic conflict between liberal democracies and authoritarian powers, with Russia and China on the top. And this has, of course, very deep consequences, not only for practical policy, but also the German mindset. I think the majority of our public, of people who are interested in politics, I think they went through a kind of roller coaster over the last year, changing or a lot of them changing their previous beliefs that every conflict can be resolved by diplomacy, compromise, and money, to the readiness to support Ukraine in this war. But maybe this is a topic for a later stage of our discussion. I would say there are still some ambiguities if we really should assist Ukraine in winning this war, and if we should strive for a military defeat of Russia in Ukraine, or if we finally should keep the back door open for a kind of political arrangement with Russia. I think this is still an unresolved and disputed issue.
Well, thank you very much. I will jump into this because I think that we now are very, very quickly in the current situation. I still would like to make this step back to these long-term trends, and I'm asking the question because I think that we actually agree on those issues Ralph discussed now. But I remember in the early 90s, when I interviewed a leading Czech politician about the new Czech-Russia policy, the answer was, there is none. And that's the best situation we are in. That was the answer. We don't need Russia policy. When I interviewed German politicians, it was absolutely clear Germany will never give up on Russia, at least not on cooperative Russia. And there was, of course, even this sort of element of Russia first policy in German Ostpolitik. So to you, Daniela, and then because you will have the floor again, Ralph, but first, Daniela, perhaps, what is the sort of as I said, this historical context in which this relationship, the long-term trends relationship, has been shaped?
Well, being asked for long terms and being historian, I will answer that there are famous sentences reflecting the diversity of Russia. And they say that Russia inherited religious tradition from Byzantine Empire, political setting from the Tatars, from the Golden Order, and culture from Europe. And that's why we do not read Russia from all the sides, that Europe understands better the culture and does not read what is the important value from the religious and political point. So maybe this is one of the long-term trends, that we do not get Russia as a complex state, as a complex society. and it is very difficult from the European point of view to see that there is some Siberian part of Russia, and that there is no need to discuss all the things just with Moscow. And this is, I think, one of continuing mistakes we do with Russia, that we choose the central politicians and central institutions as the partners, as the only partners, not taking into account that there are some other millions of the population. So that would be one of the important long-term trends in our contacts with Russia. The other would be that we do not take too seriously those societies in between Eastern Europe and Moscow. We first had to Moscow for the orders, how this space and region should be divided, solved, and directed. So there was lack of communication with Minsk, Kiev for decades. And first, our politician, meaning the European politicians, would go to debate with Moscow politicians. Mm-hmm. And that is something which actually is in, I would say, tough confrontation with what we hear now from Moscow, that Moscow was somehow backwarded, you know, and not being the partner in the debates with the West, because there is clear history of dealing with the politicians sitting in the Moscow Central or in the Kremlin, while ignoring the other ones. So there is some, as well as the long trend, I would point to some miscommunication and some unclear understanding on both sides, whether we are taking seriously those partners we actually choose, but there were no other partners than those who were on the sides of the agreements. But before I'll turn the floor to you again, I just will share my personal experience from yesterday, because it again shows very important long-term trend in our contacts with Russia and post-Soviet space, if I may call it this way. My daughter returned yesterday from school with the notice that her new Ukrainian schoolmate received during the lesson of English SMS with the notice that her father died fighting in Ukraine. And this situation really broke my heart, understanding that this is a small child in the middle of foreign country, between children which actually are not friends, they were unknown to her. It's a girl. Several months before, she cannot share the experience with them in her own language. And I want to say, with mentioning this experience of my daughter, that this is also something what we are getting from the East. It's not just that we are welcoming the refugees. The war experience comes with them, and there are hundreds of children in risk or at risk, that they will at any moment receive the very same notice that somebody they love died. So this is direct contact with the war we are receiving, even so we are sitting safely in the middle of Europe, and we can feel like nothing is happening to us. So there are striving and dying people around us, and we have direct contact with them. So that is very important trend, I think we have to mention in this context as well.
Thank you very much for this very personal note, and we are of course aware of this tragic situation, and therefore we are also discussing here the issue, because we want also to see why did we really underestimate some of these dangers, why our policy has not been up to date, as Ralph said, these sort of myths and misperceptions were there. But Ralph, would you like to comment on these long-term things, trends which Daniela just commented on?
Yeah, thank you very much. I could follow up Daniela's personal remarks. You know, we in our team here at Lipmod in Berlin, we have 8 staff members with an Ukrainian background. We have a lot of partners and friends. Personally, I've been in Ukraine, not only in Kiev, but also in Kharkiv and other places twice since the beginning of the year. So this war is very present for us. Not necessarily, I would say, for the majority of our political elites and our population who are still talking about solidarity with Ukraine, or we are generously supporting Ukraine, which is, in my view, is at best half of the truth, because Ukraine is fighting for our interests. Ukrainians are dying for our security and for the future of Europe. So I think we need to strengthen this sense of urgency that this is our case, which are the Ukrainian fighting for, and that we cannot allow us to get tired with Ukraine. So coming back to your question, I would like to pick up your remark on Russia first. This is absolutely true. This was the paradigm of German Eastern politics since the late 60s. You know, Willy Brandt and Egon Bahr. Russia first. So at this time is the Soviet Union, and Central Eastern Europe, the in-between countries, had been very much perceived through the lens of German-Russian relations. And I think the lowest point had been reached when during the Solidarność movement in Poland, Egon Bahr and Herbert Wehner and other prominent German politicians distanced themselves from Solidarność, and that Solidarność is a security risk for Europe, and that the Soviet Union would have a right to intervene militarily in Poland. So I think this is the most, I would even say, scandalous example for this Russia first policy, and it is very deeply rooted in German history and in the German tradition. Yeah, it at least started at the beginning of the last century with Rapallo and the establishing special relations between Germany and the Soviet Union, but also economically, you have a very long-term pattern that of these economic interdependence and economic ties between Germany and Russia. Russia should guarantee the raw materials and the energy sources for the German economy, and Germany would supply Russia with machinery and technology advanced products. And this kind of thinking is only slowly now eroding. Along with that, I think hopefully another view or another attitude towards the Central Eastern European states will evolve to recognize them in their own political rights and to recognize that these are subjects of their history. And this also was disputed regarding Ukraine. You still have a lot of voices in Germany that Ukraine belongs to the Russian sphere of influence. And of course, Ukraine cannot join NATO and become a member of the transatlantic alliance. That would provoke Russia. And this is still this we are looking to these countries through their Russian eyes. But I think the war started to work as a game changer. I hope this will then continue, and including German-Poland then relations, which are at an all-time low. You probably are aware of that. I think we urgently need to repair these then relations, and we have to acknowledge that the gravitation within the European Union will move more to the east and to the north. Yeah, the old days when the German, French engine was the driver of the European Union, and the rest had to follow. These days are over.
Thank you, Ralph. Before we open the debate for the public, I just wanted to challenge you both on one issue, and that's your perception of the cultural ties, cultural affinity, sometimes fascination, and the societal dimension of the mutual relations, German-Russian, Czech-Russian. Because sometimes we have the feeling that we are talking about the high politics, security, economics, but not that much about the society, and not so much about culture, because while culture matters quite a lot in our mutual relations. So perhaps Daniel, if you'd like to start.
I will continue your mentioning the 1990s. I believe that while the state decided not to have relations with Moscow, is the best way to have some relations with the East, there was some hidden communication left for those who had ideological, political, economic contacts with the Soviet space before. And this was left for those people. While the politicians did not care, there were people who continued having these economically driven contacts, I would say. So to say that there is some general understanding of what Russia is among the Czech society would be a mistake, because there are parts of the society which are able to communicate with the sub-elites, I would say, of Russia, not the highest points of Russian political elites, which are not accepted in the Czech society as those who should drive our values. On the other hand, we had, well, not recently, but we had some top range meetings between the presidents, for example. And I think that a significant point was that when former President Zeman was meeting President Putin, the ambassador was not allowed to be part of it. And there was some of the advisors sitting next to the meeting. So this is a significant point, for me to see these, again, continuities resulting from the situation of late 1980s and 1990s. There is some other interests. There are some other interests playing some role, which is unreadable for us. And it's the same case of top German politicians being members of some top bodies of Russian economic firms after they go away from their functions. So there is some double communication between the societies. Some have the knowledge, but are not accepted. So there is always some debate on values present among the contact between Russia and Czech Republic. And I think it's the case of Germany as well, that there are those who know, those who act, but they are not accepted.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. Ralph?
Yeah, this is really a big story. If you are looking to these special German-Russian relations, I would say it's a mix of fear, the experience of 2 world wars and the German defeat in the Second World War and the Russian occupation of parts of Europe. So there's a fear element in it. Don't provoke the Russian bear. There's an element of guilt in it. The feeling of German guilt and for the current generation responsibility for this horrible war of destruction and the mass killings of the Wehrmacht and the SS, not only the Holocaust, but against the Slavic people in the Second World War. And interestingly, this fear of guilt and responsibility is almost completely focused on Russia. You don't have similar feelings for Ukraine, for Belarus, for Poland, which had been suffering at least as much as the Russian people in the Second World War. And this kind of distortion is very, I would say, diabolically exploited by the Russian propaganda. Always to remember the Germans, to their responsibility and their guilt towards Russia, and letting away Ukrainians and the others. And the third element, which you had been touching upon, the cultural element, I would say it's kind of romanticism. The idea of soul familiarity between Germany and Russia. You know, Goethe and Tolstoy and Nietzsche and Dostoevsky and Beethoven and Tchaikovsky. I would say a mix of kind of sentimentality that we are the people with deep soul searching, with a deep cultural understanding, deep cultural roots, different to these materialistic Anglo-Saxons, with their commercial culture. And this is a very long tradition in the German cultural history. And again, I say it's we need to discover the cultural heritage of the other Central Eastern European countries and to recognize their contribution to the common European culture.
Thank you. So we touched upon number of issues. We can't go now into detail too much because we want also to invite our public to ask questions, to comment. We have some, I guess, 30 minutes still to go. So please, I know that Mr. Usati wanted to first address you, representative of the Ukrainian embassy here in Prague. So, Mr. Usati, you have the floor. Yeah.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, Your Excellencies. First of all, I would like to thank to everybody for your help, to your government, to your parliament, because we do appreciate all the help we got. We do appreciate help to our refugees for creating necessary conditions for them. We will never forget about it. And today is a very, very symbolic day for Ukraine because 1 year before, our armed force of Ukraine liberated Bucha from Russian occupied troops. They were ousted from Bucha, Kiev region. Ukrainian defenders that entered the town discovered dozens of dead bodies of civilians bearing signs of torture scattered across it. The whole world has seen the consequences of Russian occupation, which lasted for 1 month. Each subsequent settlement deliberated by armed forces of Ukraine revealed horrific war crimes and crimes against humanity committed by Russian invaders. The town of Bucha, one of the most impacted Ukrainian towns, became the symbol of Russian crimes of unprecedented scale. Today, the war crimes and crimes against humanity committed during Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine are being investigated by Ukraine and by a number of other states, as well as by International Criminal Court. The referral of situation in Ukraine made by 43 states and the previously given Ukraine's consent by ICC's jurisdiction over all crimes committed during the armed conflict since 2014 provide a solid basis of the work to the Office of Prosecutors of the ICC. What happened in Bucha a year ago and continues to take place day by day in the territories of Ukraine temporarily occupied by Russia remains a matter of the most serious concern of the whole world. If Russian political and military leadership is not taken to justice for its crimes of aggression, it may repeat itself anywhere on the planet. We call all the countries of the world seeking to live in peace to support and establishing the special tribunal as an effective tool for reaching this goal. I would like to talk about an issue that is relevant to Ukraine. It is a time for Ukraine to be a full member of Europe. Today, most Europeans support membership for Ukraine. We have already gained the status of a candidate country. We are already preparing to start membership negotiations. We are already united with the European economy, logistics, and energy. We believe that just as there is no alternative for Ukrainian victory, there is no alternative to Ukraine in European Union and no alternative to Ukraine in NATO. This means that there is no alternative to completely eliminating Russia's aggression. On the 1st March, on the 6th day of full-scale war, the European Parliament adopted a resolution supporting not just our country, but EU candidate status country for our country. It was a vision that motivated us to be resilient and stay on our path. Over the past year, Ukraine and the European Union have been able to accomplish what the previous wave of leaders thought was impossible. Europe is finally freeing itself from its destructive dependence from Russian fossil fuels. Europe is being cleansed by corrupt influence of Russian oligarchic business. Europe is defending itself against the infiltration agent of Russian special services, who have even considered Europe as a place to hunt down opponents of the Russian dictatorship. It is also the first time in history that the European Union has provided military assistance of this scale. The importance of ensuring prompt supply of military equipment to Ukraine by member states is emphasized. The European Union emphasized the support of President Zelensky's peace formula. Ukraine will continue to work hard to prepare for the membership negotiation process. In this concert, Ukrainian side announced its initiative to start the process of self-screening the compliance to Ukrainian legislation with the EU rules based on the analytical report of Ukraine implementation on the EU legislation submitted to the EU. Another important...
Excuse me, Mr. Usati, could you come up with a question, or we understand that this is the agenda of
It's my comment.
Sorry?
It was my comment.
Your comment.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Are you coming to close comment, or are you coming to point or to question some of those our participants?
Yes. I would like to say that we still need your help. We need your help in defending from Russia troops. And we need your help in establishing an international criminal tribunal. We need your help for our refugees. And I would like to stress that there is no secure Europe without secure situation in Ukraine. We can win only together. And I'm sure that we will win. With your help, with the help of Germany, with the help of Czech Republic, we will create vote, and Ukraine will be the central element of this vote. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we all understand and support your sort of position, and also our discussion reflects that fact. So thank you again. First, now the questions of the audience. Is anybody going to pose the first question? If there is none, I still misuse my position. Perhaps I turn now to Ralph. Ralph, you of course indicated already that there was some misperception in German policy attitude to Russia. Of course, my question would be, and it's a question which we discussed with Volker Weichsel, the question whether this wrong assessment of Putin regime, also after Crimea annexation, if this wrong assessment was simply a mistake, or wrong analysis, misunderstanding of the nature of the region, or whether it was a mistake of policy making, of the strategy. Berlin understood well what is Putin capable of, but decided to go forward with economic sort of cooperation, infrastructure, Nord Stream 2 even. So was it rather a naivety, or was it form of a wrong policy assessment? How would you see German attitude there?
Good question. I think it was a mix of short-sighted interests, especially economic interests, and especially and particularly in the energy sector. You know, when the German energy-intensive industries, they heavily pushed for this kind of strategic partnership with seemingly cheap Russian gas and also oil. But it was more than that. I think until the very last minute, the majority of our political elites, they shied away from reading the picture on the wall. Now, you already mentioned 2014, the annexation of Crimea and the first intervention in eastern Ukraine. You can go back to 2008, Georgia. Still, Russia is occupying de facto 20% of Georgian territory. You can look at the Syrian war, which to a certain extent was a test ground for the Russian army, especially for the Air Force. And you could see all these kind of bombardments against civil targets, against the civil population in Syria, and the West decided to ignore it. Yeah? And not only Germany, but so German politics for very long stick to their, I would say, illusionary perception of Russia as a difficult partner. And that there can be no European security order without the participation of Russia, because the consequences of changing this perception had just been inconvenient. Yeah, that we have to return to a certain extent to a policy of containment and deterrence, that we have to increase our military spending, that we have to rearrange our energy relations, yeah, and switch from Russia to other sources. So I think it was not intentional. It was just it was too inconvenient to face the realities in Russia. This is also the case with the domestic developments in Russia. This step by step from this kind of directed democracy, which was a term in the beginning of Putin, to an authoritarian regime, and now to a more and more totalitarian regime. And we didn't face this in its dimension. Yeah, and there's a relationship between the authoritarian rule at home and aggression then externally, and the absolute power of the Kremlin. This was the precondition for this war against Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Daniela, maybe could you comment on one point? Well, Ralph also mentioned, we engaged with the Russian society in many ways. But sometimes I had this impression that human rights protection has always been part of the foreign policy identity of Czech Republic since 90s. Do you think we did enough in this case, on this sort of track of foreign policy? Because sometimes I had this feeling it was sometimes rather a bumper stick than real policy sort of strategy, backed by finance, by institutions, by people really going. I even remember one of our presidents going to Moscow, having a press conference with Vladimir Putin, and criticizing the lack of democracy in the European Union, not mentioning at all that at that time, the same time, Putin was tightening the screws on Russian civil society. So, what is your sort of assessment of this?
I think that the position of the Czech politics was more or less aware of intruding into the internal politics of other states. So there were refugees welcome. There was some humanitarian aid sent to Chechnya, for example. There always was some support to Memorial and NGOs who care about human rights, but there was no tough position of the state itself. There were some extra or alternative ways to support the power inside the society, but no stance of the state itself. And I believe that this was sort of reaction on one traditional tool of Russian diplomacy, Soviet diplomacy, which is the public diplomacy. They were and they are still very good at using this communication with subcultures in other societies, promoting the Soviet or Russian agenda, which then starts to be part of the politics of the state, who is the addressee of this politics. So there always are some subcultures who protest against the Czech politics of human rights, or how do we do it here. So this is very complicated double communication, which is intended to influence the positions and stances of the government, which was led from Moscow to communicate with the Czech society. So there was not a strong stance affordable for our politicians.
Okay. Thank you very much. So questions? There's a question, please. Second row.
Thank you very much for this interesting discussion. My name is Sebastian Steinert. I'm head of the Foreign Policy Commission of the German Junge Union Berlin, and we're here actually in a trinational delegation with Junge ÖVP Vienna and Mladi Lidovci from Czech Republic. And we're very happy to be here with you today. My question is regarding the long-term situation. From what I understand is that we're actually getting ready to face a war situation that lasts for months, if not years. And we see, at least in Germany, some movements that actually call for a drawback of the support, at least in military terms, so-called pacifistic movements. So my question goes to you. What do you think needs to be done that public support, also military support, can be upheld or within the broader society, especially in Germany, so that military support can be given even if it is necessary for multiple years? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Steinert. The question basically goes to the second panel, I have to say, but perhaps the section of the question which deals with the society is very important, crucial. So how our societies really deal with this prolonged conflict. And back again to Ralph and to you, Daniela, there have been some reflexes in both our societies. Some sections of the society still feel attached to Russia, to some kind of myth of Russia, perhaps, but still, it is a reality, even if it is a virtual reality. So how do you think this is going to develop? How the societies will cope with this really very demanding crisis situation, which has, after all, also material sort of presence. We talked about the refugees. We can talk about the economic costs, and perhaps also about, we can talk about the fear of the escalation of the conflict. So both of you, how would you see the future of how our societies will deal with the agenda, with the development of the conflict? Perhaps.
So maybe I'll start continuing with what I've said lately. It's public policy strategy to argument with peace, and pacifism is traditional Soviet tool to destroy unity in Europe. Remember 1980s Pershings in Europe and the response from the Soviet side, SS-20. And you were, flooded with pacifistic demonstrations and campaigns promoted from Moscow. So that it was something we should expect from Moscow to start with. That's natural. And to me, how to solve the situation, how to show to our society that old slogan of Soviet times, miru mir, peace to the world, is over, is just a personal experience. There is no clear solution for Ukraine proposed by Moscow. There is nothing for the Ukrainians. There is no clear offer how these dead lives will be paid off. So until we see clear plan, there is no way we could take these slogans as real. And this is, again, one personal experience. When I was in Moscow State University studying, I was passing through that bridge, which goes from Vorobyevy Gory to Luzhniki. And on the side of the bridge, there was this sign, miru mir, and it was full of these signs. It's recolored now. In 2021, where I was there lastly, it was recolored. It's not the slogan people would have among themselves anymore. The war is the slogan now. And you can just hear the songs from YouTube or whatever, that the slogan inside the society itself, inside the Russian society changed. They are not admiring peace if you just hear the words.
Thank you. Ralph? You have to unmute yourself, please, I think.
Pardon me, yeah.
Sure.
Just two quick additional points. The first one is I'm coming back to what I've been saying previously. I think we have, and this is a matter of political leadership, we have to explain to our public that this is not just Ukraine's war, that this is a war about European security, the future of the European security order. It is a war about the future of international law, because the Russian attack against Ukraine is also at the same time an attack against international law. The basic global order is at stake. So it's also about our national and European interests. And the second thing I would like to touch on is we have to be clear about what should be the outcome of this war and which kind of peace are we achieving, we the European nations. And to let this question open and to keep on with the kind of strategic ambiguity regarding the end game, the outcome of this war, will turn into kind of strategic weakness of the West. We have to be very clear that Ukraine's territorial integrity and political sovereignty is not negotiable. This is what we have to defend. And this is what finally has to define kind of sustainable peace. Yeah, no compromise on the basic principles on which Europe is built on. And in the consequence, this means that we have to step up our support politically, financially, and also military to enable Ukraine to push back the Russian army beyond the international acknowledged borders. And this is what we have to fight for, also to convince our audience and our public. Of course, it is disputed, and there is the risk that support for Ukraine will erode if it is only communicated as a matter of solidarity and not as a matter of our core interests, which are at stake in this war.
Thank you. Further questions, please. Yes, please.
Greetings. My name is Daniel Naumov. I'm a student at Charles University, a master degree in international relations, and I'm Russian by nationality. I would like to ask you on the point you've mentioned before about the back door of diplomacy. Do you believe that peace is an option with Russia not defeated in a way that allows it to be also punished by international court? Because my point is that in this war, many Russians and non-Russians who are paid for their own benefit by Russians are supporting the war through different means, not military. For example, disinformation, lies, in trying to erode other societies. Do you imagine that the world could return to normalcy without all these people being held accountable to their role in this basically genocide? This is my question.
Thank you. A very complex question. And again, starting to discussing actually topics of the second panel. But still, my panelists, you are very well welcome to give your point of view on this very difficult question, of course.
Well, I'm thinking about genocide, which took place, or those acts of the 1930s in the Soviet Union, which were never punished because the Soviet Union won the Second World War. So that would be my answer. Putin needs victory in this war to forget about being punished. If to some extent we can speak about the Russian defeat, then there will be some road open to the UN institutions reform. Because until Russia sits in the board of the security board of United Nations, all these attempts will be vetoed.
Thank you. Ralph?
If I may just slightly correct my question, I also meant common people, not just the Russian leadership. What do we do with all this basically knowingly supporting this regime?
Ralph?
I think
There's a typical German question.
I think
after
there's,
war.
I think we are all aware that we should not think about a post-war kind of re-education in Russia and of the Russian people, which took place in Germany after the Second World War. Russia will not be occupied by Western armies. There will be no military regime change. So I think we should focus on two possible areas of action. The one is supporting the International Criminal Court in its investigations, documenting and following up war crimes in Ukraine, and taking those accountable who are involved in these war crimes actively. And the second area is taking the leadership accountable. I think this is an enormously important political message. And it would definitely define a break with the current Russian leadership. And it would be a signal to the Russian people that there is no future for Russia with this regime. Maybe a future as a vassal of China. But I don't think this is what the majority of Russians are dreaming of. So sending a clear message that it's not only the common soldier and on the ground, but the political leadership has to be held accountable for this genocidal warfare. And establishing an international tribunal on war of aggression. I think this has to be the message we should send to Russia.
Thank you, Ralph. I think that was a perfect bridge to the second panel. And a nice concluding remark to our panel, because this opening of perspective for the future is something what we want to discuss. And as you mentioned, of course, that's something Germany has dealt after the Second World War very intensively with. And we, of course, remember this we also remember the German experience and our experience for post-war development. So thank you very much. Thank my distinguished panelists. Thank you for your attention. And now what comes is a very quick technical break. Who doesn't need to leave, please don't leave, because we just will rearrange the panel and we'll continue with the second panel, which, as I say, now was actually introduced through the last exchange on the issue of the future of Russia. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I guess we can start slowly. Good afternoon, everybody. Let me welcome you to the second panel. My name is Zuzana Listova. I'm from the German and Austrian Studies Department at the Charles University, and I have the honor to chair the second panel with three distinguished guests. My first guest for today is Matthias Lüttenberg. He is the director for Eastern Europe, the Caucasus, and Central Asia in the German Federal Foreign Ministry. Welcome, Mr. Lüttenberg. The second one is Jaroslav Kurfürst. He is here as the deputy of the Czech Foreign Ministry. He's the Director General for Europe. And last but not least, my third panelist is Michal Romancov. He is a publicist and lecturer at the Charles University, and he is at the Institute for Politological Studies. So welcome. And as the first panel dealt mostly with the past and a little bit with the present, we will be discussing the present and the future. And my first question for the panelists is, how should we deal with Russia nowadays when the war is still on? Are there any channels which work? Does it make sense to communicate with Russia? Does it make sense to communicate with the Russian government? Or are there possibly other people we can communicate with, as Daniela Kolenovská suggested? And I will pass the floor to Mr. Lüttenberg as first.
Thank you. Thank you so much also for having me. And I'm particularly honored to sit back to back with the most famous balcony in German history. And it's really a pleasure to be here today. On your question, let me start by saying that what we experienced since 24th February last year is really a turning point, not only in German-Russian relations or EU-Russia relations, but Ralf Fuchs put it very well. It's a global question. It's about our rules-based order as such, about the international order. And therefore, the question, how do we deal with Russia today, very much has to be seen against this backdrop and about the size of the changes and what's going on. Before that, of course, we had and it was mentioned in the previous panel, we had our relations, energy, and we were negotiating, of course, in the Minsk format. We had several formats on Southern Caucasus and else on Transnistria, where Russians played a role. All of this is basically over, so there's no functioning negotiating format that I'm aware of where Russians would play a part, be it in the OSCE or be it elsewhere. Bilaterally, our relationship has changed dramatically, and it still hasn't really reached the bottom of our what we could possibly think of. And even in the years before the war of aggression, we were already spiraling downwards and not knowing where this would end. But if I look at the state of German-Russian relations today, it's really deplorable. Of course, one thing is to say there's no business as usual, but we are really losing one asset after the other. And if you read the media today, you would read about our cultural relationship, the freezing of assets of the Goethe Institute, and things that are really reaching a new dimension. And it's this in itself, of course, is a very sad finding. But of course, there are good reasons why we have decided to take sanctions, for example, as the EU, and why we have decided to freeze basically all contacts with the official Russia, with the exception of those which are completely independent of the state, which doesn't mean that we are not having from time to time still also government-to-government contacts. You are aware that Chancellor Scholz sometimes is calling Vladimir Putin in the Kremlin, not so often, but and not for quite some time. But of course, I would argue it's important at least to bring our messages to his ear, because I'm pretty sure that he doesn't hear very often what our thinking actually is and what our concerns are about what's going on in Ukraine. On the other side, of course, we do have working relations with the Russian diplomats. We have an embassy in Moscow, and of course, we are also in contact with Russian colleagues there, but it doesn't happen very often. Much less than before, because the topics that we can discuss are not the same anymore. We don't talk a lot about issues like the ones that we had on our joint agenda before. It's basically down to bilateral issues and the most necessary conversations. Of course, there are still formats which are helpful and of which Russia is an element of, for example, the Black Sea Grain Initiative, which is a very important way to bring grain from Ukraine into the world, and the opening of at least 3 ports with the agreement of Russia was very helpful to bring more grain to the countries in Africa and Asia and elsewhere. And there's also the famous channel between Ukraine and Russia on the exchange of prisoners, which I'm glad that it exists, because to my knowledge, there's not much more that can be discussed at the moment between Ukraine and Russia. We are, of course, quite concerned about the latest suspension of the New START treaty, for example, which step that Russia undertook. And in addition, the announcement of for positioning nuclear weapons in Belarus. And this underlines how important it is to have a channel of communication between the United States of America and Russia. When, for example, Mr. Milley speaks to Mr. Gerasimov, I think this is important to have, because the nuclear messaging has to be crystal clear, and we cannot afford to close these lines of communication. Many other lines of communications are possibly not that necessary at this point in time. So therefore, we are really reducing our engagement to the level necessary. The criterion for us, if we deal with Russians, and of course, there's a lot of context that we used to take with civil society dialogue, for example. Petersburg dialogue, for example, is one of the key pillars of our civil society context. It has now been suspended. It has now been dissolved. It's reaching its end because there's no joint basis anymore for this sort of dialogue. And there you have to understand that this has been started by Vladimir Putin and Gerhard Schröder a while ago, and that it has become a more and more officialized contact and not really reaching the real civil society with which we still want to be in contact. And there, I think it's important to distinguish wherever we can between people who are really independent and who are still interested in being in touch with us. And there's plenty of those. And then, of course, there's everything else which is related to the state, which makes contacts for us far more complicated, be it in the cultural sphere, be it in the scientific sphere, and of course in the political sphere. It goes without saying. Parliaments are still, of course, free to do what they want, but I can assure you that the activities between Germany and Russia have also reached a new low, and there's from time to time interactions which I don't want to comment on, but it's really common understanding in Germany that these times are so extraordinary that we have to take extraordinary measures, which we've done. And our key goal is really to put as much pressure on Russia as possible, be it in isolating them internationally where we can, or be it in taking the sanctions that I mentioned before. And this is really our key goal.
Thank you very much, Mr. Luttenberg, for mentioning all those different levels of communication and maybe the relevant topics which are still there. Mr. Kurfürst, are the Czech, let's say, ideas about the communication with Russia, or the Czech strategy, is it the same or is it different from the German point of view?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you for doing this important debate. And I'm especially pleased that this is happening in the Czech-German context. I will not be very original because what Matthias was talking about, that's mainly all the EU mindset. And he was speaking I guess, not only about the German position, but about the EU and NATO allies, countries, how we deal with Russia, because in that context today, the West is quite united. And but to be somehow original or adding something to the discussion, I would say the communication is maybe something even more philosophical. What is the war? In a way, war is communication of two wills. In this time, we have a communication of the will of Russia or President Putin, which is trying to reshape the international order, to recreate the rule-based international order, to grasp the territory of Ukraine and defeat the West, maybe revenge from the failure of Soviet Union in the Cold War. So that's the communication of Putin. He is communicating with us, with our public, when he says that he will deploy the nuclear weapons to Belarus. He is trying to communicate to us his will when he's threatening with the nuclear weapons and so on. Then from our side, there is a communication that we are ready to defend it. And we have to be very strong if we want to defeat. We are protecting really the basics of international law, of rule-based international order. Of course, the principle that the sovereign country cannot be attacked by the neighbor and so on and so on. It was so well discussed in the previous panel. And I would say this kind of communication is, I would say, political communication. This political communication is happening via public. This conference is also this kind of communication, and we should not underestimate it. We are communicated also with our public about sustainability of our effort, about explaining why we do that, why it is important for the future generations, and so on. So, and this is also the communication with Russia. Of course, political communication means also that from time to time, the politicians are calling to Putin, but it should have the sense, it should be at least have the meaning. Now, when we see that there is no room for any compromise from Russia and there is no will, it is useless, frankly. But there could be the moment when some communication could be done on the political level. I would hesitate. Sorry, I would hesitate about Putin himself, as he's really considered now war criminal officially. Then there is diplomatic communication, and here diplomats, they fully depend on politicians and political environment, political decision. But in the international organization, multilateral organization, they are communications which are happening, and also bilateral. We do have the embassy here, and I mean Russian embassy here and Czech embassy. There is a communication very limited to the purely bilateral technical issues, and when this is about the war, it is basically it is not very pleasant communication, I would say. And then there should be always the crisis communication, the channels Matthias also mentioned between, let's say, the generals, etc. This is so. There is a communication, but the political is the most important. And as Putin is now still pursuing the goal of war and showing this will, I think there is not too much sense to negotiate. They don't want to negotiate.
Thank you much for broadening this focus and also mentioning that the communication is not only the communication between the governments, let's say, or the diplomats, but also the communication with the public, our public, and also the Russian public, which is really important. And Mr. Romansov, US analyst, if you hear that, would you also say that like we Europeans are on the same page, or are there some differences in your opinion?
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me. And now thank you very much for passing the floor to me. I do not know. Because I'm familiar more or less with the environment here in Czechia and to some limited level, let's say, in neighboring Slovakia. And for example, situation here in Czechia and situation in Slovakia, unfortunately, I would say is quite profoundly different. Nevertheless, speaking about the question you have asked at the very beginning, I think that the basic prerequisite for meaningful, and that's important, for meaningful cooperation is trust. And the question is whether we can trust Russian regime at the moment. And yes, of course, Russia is not only the current regime. Nevertheless, as far as I am able to evaluate it, Putin and his melody makers, so to speak, they are in power in every single important aspect of Russian life at the moment. Putin has built extremely robust regime. He's building it for 23 years. And in my opinion, regardless what's going on the battlefield in Ukraine, whether Russia will somehow miraculously win it, or whether Russia will be defeated in Ukraine, the regime will be there. And from my point of view, as long as there is Putin's regime, there is very small chance for any meaningful communication. But speaking again about with whom we can, let's say, communicate in Russia, because Russia is definitely not only the Putin's regime. There is quite interesting group of experts dealing with various questions of Russian society, the Minchenko group, and quite recently they published survey on Russia, and they said that today we are dealing with 4 different Russias, so to speak, inside of Russia. First of all, it's fighting Russia, and that's that part of society which is directly involved in military operation. So basically, it's entire Russian military, conscripts, those who were mobilized, let's say, and perhaps their relatives, etc. So it's some part of Russian society which is, as a minimum, several million people strong. Then Russia, which traveled away. It's another important segment of Russian society. And again, this segment of Russian societies is about, I don't know, as a minimum, again, 1 million people strong. Those are those Russians who decided to leave when the mobilization was announced. As far as I know, the level of immigration from Russia was the single highest in recent decades. So let's say, I don't know how many, 2 million Russians basically decided to leave Russia, either because of war or because of threat of mobilization. Plus there is approximately, I don't know, 20 million strong group of Russians who decided to leave Russia since the beginning of 1990s, and they are living predominantly here in Europe, in the United States, Canada, Australia, etc. Then, according to Minchenko Group analysts, Stolichnaya Russia, so basically that part of Russia which is not living only in Moscow and St. Petersburg. Nevertheless, those people are concentrated predominantly in there, plus in some other big Russian cities. And those are the Russians which so far are loyal. They learn how to collaborate. They develop different strategies, how to live well, especially from the point of view of the economic well-being. And again, this segment of Russian society is, as a minimum, several million people strong. And last but not least, so-called deep Russia. And this is by far the largest segment of Russian society, which is something between 60 and maybe 70% of entire Russian society. And those are people living in small cities, in the countryside, etc. And those people are uneducated. They never ever traveled. Vast majority of them never ever left Russia. They have no idea how the world looks like. They are hateful. They are violent, and they are evil. And that's a problem, because speaking frankly, I do not see any segment of Russian society which is still in Russia at this moment we can communicate meaningfully with.
Okay. That doesn't sound really optimistic. Nevertheless, Mr. Luttenberg, I would ask you if you would agree with this kind of analysis, and if there are maybe from the side of the German governments any attempts to negotiate with maybe the groups which might be approachable for any kind of like meaningful communication.
Well, thank you. Interesting analysis, and I think I agree with most of it, because it's our understanding as well that those who fled the country, the numbers may differ. Some have returned in the meantime. This is also a phenomenon that just escaped the first wave of mobilization then return, might flee again once the second wave should come. But the vast majority of the people, and they are fully agree, is just either looking away or just not really mindful of what's going on. And if they do understand about the war against Ukraine, they rather seem to share the government's position on it. And this is there are many public polls which indicate that, well, 70, sometimes 80 or more % seem to agree. We shouldn't believe that one for one. I think that polling in Russia is really not very reliable, because many people would just not tell the truth when they ask questions. But what I do see, though, is that there's a stable support for what's going on, and this is an indication that there's no major changes to be expected. And those people who dare to speak up and often pay a terrible price for it. I just want to remind you of the case of this 13-year-old girl whose father was just arrested, and these are just inhumane conditions under which I would maybe also rather shut up than speaking out. And therefore, who is there that we can still address, who could be an agent for change, is a very difficult but a crucial question. Because I mean, we cannot just sit by. I'm not arguing for regime change or anything, but of course we are interested in. And just today, as we sit here, there will be a forum in Berlin with the exiled Russian community, where we bring them together to think about exactly these questions, because it's important to understand how we can help to make Russia on the long run a better place, where people would also think differently about their neighborhood and their role in a globalized world. But very difficult to make diplomatic actions in this regard, because our traditional interlocutors, of course, are the government. But it's up to civil society in a way to connect with civil society from there. And it can't be just done by the state alone. We really need to have all channels of communication, the artists, the media people, and then maybe over time things can develop. But this is a very long process.
Thank you, Mr. Kurfürst. What is the position of the Czech government in this regard? Is there any active dialogue with people from the Russian immigration groups? Is there any active dialogue with the Russian opposition, for instance?
Yes, of course. Not only that, we do have long-term ties with all the civil society in Russia from 90s. The civil society in Russia developed a lot of activities. Many people were trying to discover or to disclose the bad things happening during the Soviet time, the communism. But then many activists were trying to defend the free media, which in 90s were there. Many pro-democratic groups were there. Of course, they are now mainly either in prison in Russia or in exile. We are maintaining all those channels open. We do have the program for civil society, but I would agree with Mikhail Romansov that in Russia, with the society, the discussion will be very difficult. The propaganda channels are that strong, and the mood in Russia itself is really pro-war, and there is no big chance that it will change out of the sudden anytime soon. Very often we were idealizing the Russian society throughout 90s and on, because we were measuring or we were analyzing that society from our own experience, let's say in Central Europe, from our own transformation, etc. But whoever can imagine all these 70 years of atrocities, great terror, gulags, and all things where people were just bringing news about the neighbor to the police, and they were rewarded for that, etc. There is a book called Whispers by Orlando Figes. He was analyzing the life in the families during the Stalinist time and shortly after the Stalin died. And here he really discovers all these differences, how much different it was. It's something very, very different from Central Europe or elsewhere. So, and of course, in addition, there is this virus of imperial idea, which is infecting even the people who you would not believe this is important for them, but it is important to them. I don't want to describe a sort of single label of Russian people or sort of dehumanize the society at all. But the history of the Soviet Union and Russia is such difficult that it's hard for us to comprehend that. And maybe I will end by just saying that when we are looking to some better future, we are looking for a really very long game, very long periods. I'm a strong believer in context, in historical context. When the big context changes, when the history flows in a powerful way, it brings with it, this current brings with it many things, and that might be a chance for the big change. And here I think democracy and the respect for human rights, all the values on which the Western society is based on, this is such a strong strong power which can bring this movement of the history forward.
Okay, let's hope for that. I have a question regarding this imperial virus you mentioned, and as you said, the majority of the Russian population is unfortunately been infected by that. Mr. Romantsov, do you think that we in Central Europe have maybe more sensibility for this kind of, or maybe this part of the Russian society or the Russian thinking, because we have our own experiences with that?
I don't think so. Unfortunately, I do not think so, because again, look at neighboring Slovakia.
Okay.
They are there's not so far overwhelming majority of Slovaks who are for Russia. Nevertheless, the minority, which is extremely vocal in Slovakia, and those people, they are openly supporting Russia, they are approximately 40% strong, which is quite scary, speaking frankly. Fortunately, we were not part of Russian Empire directly. Only the Poles, the Baltic states, the Ukrainians, of course, they were part of Russian Empire, and then also part of the Soviet Union, with the exception of Poland. Nevertheless, Poland was part of the Soviet bloc. So those are people with some daily experience, and you can see that their attitude towards Russia is 100% negative. By the way, every single nation under the sun, including the Central Asia nations, including states in the South Caucasus, with some experience with Russia, they are doing whatever they can to be as distant from Russia as possible. When Xi Jinping was visiting Putin quite recently, he wrote an article to Zhenmin Zhipao, the newspaper of the Chinese Communist Party, and the part of the article was dealing with the phrase that Amur is a river of friendship, which is nonsense. Amur was a river of very tense confrontation between the Russians and the Chinese back in 18th century, in 19th century, then again in 20th century. No one, even Chinese, are in friendly relationship with Russia, which does not mean that it's impossible to communicate with them. After all, the Chinese, to a certain degree, even though that I have no preference for Chinese regime whatsoever, to a certain degree, they basically are able to communicate. Among other things, because they do not care about anything what is truly valuable from the point of view of values for Russia, including that, let's say, imperial mindset. For example, Chinese, they do not pay any attention to the liberation of, let's say, Europe from either Napoleon or Hitler. When Xi Jinping visited Putin back in 2015, again, there was an article and the Russian newspaperman had an interview with Xi Jinping, and he asked him, okay, so you are coming to Moscow to celebrate our great victory, and we were great at that period of time, and he agreed with everything, and at the end he said, yeah. And then in September, Putin is going to visit me in Beijing, and he is going to celebrate our victory. And let me remind you that our war started earlier than yours, that it lasted longer than yours, and we had more people who died than you, and that's it. At the end, with that, pardon my French, with all that bullshit about Russian liberalization of Europe, etc. And perhaps this is the way how to communicate meaningfully in Russia. If we want to start our communication with Russia, let's start with a brand new point, with clear table.
Yes, and maybe the point to start with a new table and to communicate otherwise will be after the war ends. And let us please turn our attention now to the future, as difficult as it might be. Mr. Kurfürst, the question now goes to your direction. What is, in your opinion, the most likely outcome of this war? And how will Russia act in the international system after this war, in your opinion?
Yeah, of course, that's a difficult question, double difficult for a diplomat. Crystal ball, if not anyone has, no. Okay. So, the ideal end of the world is obvious. Ukraine is liberating all its territory, Russia is pushed back, and then we can start to speak about the relationship of that Russia, which was pushed back.
Just if you say the whole territory, you mean with Crimea? Including Crimea. Okay.
So that's the goal, which is ideal, which is restoring the international law, and there is no one who could have the right to say something different from the democratic world. Definitely, you will not hear these voices, I think, from the reasonable diplomats, but Ukrainians, to negotiate whether there is a compromise from that goal. Then we can discuss whether the situation will develop this way or not. There are different variants. Russia is a very powerful country, but we have to support Ukraine to achieve that ideal goal, and we will do it. I can speak on Czechia as long as it takes, and from that, let's discuss what will happen. Russia is being pushed back. Let's say this scenario. Let's take this scenario. So, what will not happen? Russia will not be defeated in a way. Let's say Nazi Germany was defeated in 1945. There will be no division or to several occupation zone. There will not be a flag of the victor over the parliament, over the Russian Duma. Russia will not be defeated that way. We will have a country where the defeat will consist in pushing the aggressor out of the territory of the sovereign neighbor, and we will reestablish the international recognized border and the order, respect for the international law. Then, for me personally, there is a notion in the history which was promoted by Lenin and big philosophers of Marxism-Leninism about the peaceful coexistence. This first word, peaceful, means this is positive. This is not positive. This is just... This is... No. I managed. So this is just not fighting each other. This is a very cold peace. This is being still maybe even enemies, but not in a war. Peaceful coexistence, Lenin was speaking about it often, that meant for him, it was like, can communism in one country, in a peaceful way, coexist with the rest of the world, which is not communist yet? Because this communism needs to spread. There was this linear vision of the history where the communist is encompassing all the globe. So, and that's the struggle, of course. So can the peaceful coexistence exist? Then it was forgotten by many, by Stalin for a while, and then it was retaken by Khrushchev. And Khrushchev made from it a key cornerstone of his policy towards the West. I think peaceful coexistence is something where for a while Vladimir Putin might stay in Moscow and then he will turn very old leader. He will then collect the fruit of this bloody war when Russia will be isolated. Its economy will be getting from bad to worse. And what will happen, unfortunately, with the Russian society, all this failure on the battlefield, all this aggression which was directed towards the West might turn internally into Russia. We have seen this before when Russia was not proceeding with the violence and aggression abroad. It was turning and looking for the internal enemy. That might happen. And that might create something in the Russian society which will come with such a difficult tension that one day Russia will strive for bigger freedom and bigger democracy. The human wish for freedom is really endless, and that's a very powerful force, much stronger than the Putin's will. So I would say the future, we have a long-term goal, more democratic Russia. Something in the middle, there is this peaceful coexistence, as I described. And then where we are, this is the war. The EU has so-called lines to take. You have different elements to isolate Russia. You have another one to build resilience of the neighbors. You have the work with the third countries around the globe. Then you have another, which is bringing about the justice, international justice, accountability, and so on and so on. So this is something where we are now. What is the most interesting part of all this development are the moments in between. What will happen between this situation now and the peaceful coexistence, this cold peace, and between the cold peace and the democratic change in Russia. These will be a triggering historical moments. So maybe I will stop here.
Thank you. Mr. Littenberg, I saw you making notes, so I guess you might disagree on some points, or is there anything else in your forecast you would like to mention?
I'm taking notes so I don't forget the important points that Jaroslav meant. But yes, maybe I slightly disagree on one point to make this more lively as a debate, but will the Russians really turn against Putin once they would lose this war, or would something repeat that we experienced in Germany after the First World War, when there was even more revanchism and people felt the need to correct the history and have a second go at their neighbors? And this is difficult to say, and we both don't have the crystal ball here with us today. In our offices, of course, there are crystal balls, but this is a difficult question to answer now. But I fully agree with everything you said on Ukraine has to win this war, and the definition of victory is, of course, one which is up to the Ukrainians to decide, and then all we can do is support them. I'm glad that you mentioned the lines to take. I think there I fully agree that we have a concept in Europe how we want to shape our relationship with the Russians in the future, and these four elements, it's definitely worth looking at them. Like the deterrence was not part of the previous package of measures that we had under the Mogherini principles, and it's high time that we understand that we have to protect not ourselves only, but also the neighborhood of Russia, thinking of Moldova, thinking of Georgia, and our own resilience, of course, in the light of ongoing hybrid attacks and our energy sectors. These are important elements of how we want to be protecting ourselves, our populations in Europe. And while we strive to isolate Russia, it's really important to see that you look at the last vote, for example, in the UN General Assembly, that 2/3 of the world either abstained or voted with the Russians. So we are not there yet. It's a huge effort to convince our international partners that this war against Ukraine is also affecting them, be it through the global food security or insecurity that can come from it, but also with a view to the international legal order. And there, every country should have serious interest in not letting these events undermine our global order. And this is what's happening. And the fourth element of the alliance, to take the interaction and the support for the civil society and the democratic opposition in Russia and abroad, I think it's also a key element, and we touched on it before in the first round of questions. But this is something where I wouldn't give up the hope that we will still be able to reach people who can be agents of change. And we have to enable, for example, all those people who fled the country to still send their messages into the country. So be it the media people, or be it the think tank community, and all of those who thought that they would have a better life out of Russia still feel very strongly about their home country, and still this is important to help them and support them, also through visa that we as Germany and also other countries are providing, because you cannot just ignore the fact that for these people it's sometimes safer if they live abroad, and therefore we can also help them. And we're grateful to have this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Romantsov. You have the advantage of not being a diplomat. So I would be really curious if you would share these opinions, or if you have a slightly different stand.
Yeah, indeed, I'm not a diplomat, and I can enjoy it very much. Well, basically, I do agree with everything what we have heard, because I think that it's a very realistic evaluation of the current situation. And again, from my point of view, I think that, again, maybe Chinese are quite important part of this puzzle, because Russia, because of Putin, who is everything, but definitely he's not some genial chess player or something like that. He burned all bridges which were created between Russia and the West, because of the stupid narrative of the war in Ukraine, that the denazification of Ukraine is a major goal, etc. He quite profoundly crippled the Russian diplomacy, which so far was quite important tool of Russian of the stability of Russian regime within the world. And now he has no other chance than to cooperate with China. And in my opinion, Chinese are going to squeeze Russia to a level which should be totally impossible for us. And maybe in a long term, let's say, in the long term, this is something what will help us to start to create new bridge towards Russia, but this time on our condition. Because for Russia, it will be the only possible escape. Because speaking frankly, I can imagine Russia as part of broader Europe. I can imagine Russia as part of Eurasia. I cannot imagine Russia as a part of the world of Islam, which is the only remaining, let's say, vector of the possible development. So let's leave China to do the dirty work, and then to start to cooperate with Russia again.
Okay, very interesting. Let us hope for that. Now it's the time when I would want to open the discussion for our audience. So if there are any questions, please raise your hand and introduce yourself shortly. I can see one hand in the back. Yeah.
Hello, Pavel Havlicek from Association for International Affairs. Thank you so much for a very interesting discussion from different angles. I very much like the German-Czech discussion on the future of Russia, but also on the approach towards the Russian state and Russian society, which is clearly after the 1 year of the Russian aggression against Ukraine going through many changes. I will ask a question to you, Matthias, and also Jaroslav. Where do you see space for the closer cooperation between Czechia and Germany? We see that on many levels this actually works, but then not maybe always on the response level. I think Matthias spoke about the response, about visas, about support for academia, students, which works actually sometimes otherwise in here in the Czech Republic. So where do you see space for closer cooperation and maybe exchange of views on that as well? Thank you so much.
Who wants to start?
Should I? Well, thank you for that question. I would say the space is huge because if you go to the European Union, for example, where both countries are members, and you look at the agenda of every and each council, you see Ukraine being part of it, refugees, social issues, defense cooperation, the export of Ukrainian production, the grain deal, and so on. And then you continue about the internal issues and justice and so on. All this is really a huge space of cooperation between Czechia and Germany and other friends and partners, NATO and other organizations. So it's wide. I would say that there was time, especially towards the beginning of that war and after the beginning of that war, when politically you could feel in the European Union having a group of countries which might be called avant-garde, and then the group of countries still hoping that there will be negotiations and there will be something else than, than what was expected in Central Europe, let's say. But now, in terms of political reading of the situation, I don't feel very much the division about the avant-gardes and etc. Maybe there is, of course, different position of Hungary, but here I would see this country being a little bit lonely in the European Union in the positions. But otherwise, you don't have a clearly distinguished avant-garde and the rest. You have a really palpable unity in the European Union, which is the basis of all these dialogues, be it Czechia and Germany or other countries. Of course, there is a practical cooperation here. There was, for example, the defense industries and defense cooperation, where the typical example is this refill of Leopards to Czech army and the Czech giving their capacities to Ukrainians. So there could be some specificities, but in general, I would see it in crafting the unity, in consolidating the common purpose and communicate it into the European public, and really standing strongly behind the principles. So that would be my answer.
Okay, thank you. We know that the relationship between the Czech Republic and Germany is really asymmetric. Germany being the much bigger country and also very important in the world politics and not only in Europe. So do you see the same interest from the German side as from the Czech side on the cooperation, Mr. Littenberg?
Well, of course, I see the same interest. I mean, this is also why we are here today to consult, and we did this earlier today to compare notes. And it's not the first time we're doing this. And I remember in the Czech Council presidency, we had similar debates, and I have to take. We really took a lot of good ideas from Prague, and then which later on became European policies. And this is the important thing, not to say that Germany and maybe France are the ones steering the European Union. This is not how our thinking is in Berlin these days. We want to have an inclusive policy and vis-a-vis Russia. I think we also learned a hard lesson in Germany that our policy was not the most successful one. And if we had listened to our neighbors east of the Elbe, then we might have also done some things better than without listening. But this is something we cannot change today. Our interest as the German government is to really consult with our closest friends and neighbors in the Czech Republic, even if there are less people than in Germany, but economically they are successful. And when we talk about the future reconstruction of Ukraine, which is the mega effort still out there, I think we can only be successful if we work closely together on sanctioning Russia. Every country's vote is having the same weight. If one of us says no, we will not be able to continue our sanctions policy, and therefore everybody has to be consulted and everybody can help. And then the example of the military support is a very good one, because there are countries who had Soviet-style main battle tanks, and then we didn't have them, so we could help, and then only went so smoothly because of that. And picking up your picture of the avant-garde, I don't know if today there is maybe no avant-garde anymore. It has become the mainstream, or maybe Germany made it to the avant-garde, which I would also like, but I'm not sure which is the better description.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Yes, please.
Now we see Russia. In the past, we considered Russia part of Europe, and that's why it was part of the Europe order. Now it's moving back. I would say, will we see after the war the Russia once again as a part of Europe, or we see it as a dangerous region like the Northern Africa or Middle East, as something which is very near Europe? It affects Europe very heavily, but it's not in Europe.
Okay, thank you very much. Because Mr. Romanzov was mentioning it a little bit previously, where Russia is going to belong to. Can you please elaborate a little bit more on that? And also, I have maybe small additional questions to that. Some of my colleagues who deal with Russia also mentioned the possibility of Russia falling apart. How possible, or how likely is this scenario in your regard?
Okay, so thank you for both questions. Well, Russia definitely is located by part of its territory in Europe, speaking from purely geographical point of view. That's reality, and I think that no one has problem with that. Nevertheless, Russia does not want to be a European country from the point of view of values. Mm-hmm. And that's something what was quite clearly declared by Putin and his regime. So, okay, let's respect that. And I liked very much what Mr. Fuchs said in previous panel, that we were trying to build European security only with Russia over several decades. Nevertheless, now there is quite interesting development, so to speak. And so we are building, and we have to build security without Russia, perhaps from Russia, or even against Russia. And that's a new political reality, and that's something what was decided in Kremlin. And speaking about the possibility of territorial disintegration of Russia, yes, of course, there is such possibility. There is no other country as a minimum between great powers with such an experience, because Russia disintegrated twice throughout the 20th century, in 1917 and then again in 1991. So as a minimum, theoretically, there is definitely space for the third possible disintegration. Nevertheless, in every single case, it has brought numerous problems. And I would say that not a single problem which, let's say, the Europe has had with Russia before disintegration was solved by that. So if there is anyone who thinks that the disintegration of Russia is going to help us to solve all the problems, let's say, better, or perhaps that the problems will disappear, in my opinion, that's only a dream. Because even disintegration of Russia does not mean that the Russia will disappear.
Thank you, Mr. Kurfürst. Would you agree with this analysis?
Yes, I fully agree. And I use even the same words when I'm answering that question, that whether Russia is Europe or not, it's the decision of Russia. Because that country, and regardless geography, either respects European values, and of course, the discussion is what is Europe? And I would say more than geography, this is the respect to some values. And if Russia doesn't want to respect, then it is their option, and they say, we are not Europe. Okay, so if you don't want to be Europe, we will not impose upon you to be Europe. And in the history, sometimes Russia was becoming more European, but sometimes it was through Europe becoming part of Russia. And then geographically, Russia was moving towards Europe, but it did not mean that it became European in terms of values. Geographically, it was moving towards Europe, as this is the same with Ukraine. So I would agree fully. I think Michal answered this in a brilliant way.
Thank you, Mr. Luttenberg. I would be wondering if this scenario of Russia falling apart is something you discuss in Berlin, and is it something you are preparing yourself for?
I really wouldn't like to speculate on the dismemberment of the Russian Federation, and it's probably a bit premature to have this discussion right now. But I'm not one of those who strongly believe that this is necessarily going to happen, even if by whatever circumstances the president would be another person. But maybe coming back also to the question of Europe, if I may. Of course, I agree with everything that was said, but I find it interesting to compare on the one side the Council of Europe and the OSCE. In the Council of Europe, I think it's even more about values than anything else, and therefore, because of different mechanisms, it was possible to expel the Russian Federation from the format. Whereas when we talk about European security, the OSCE, Russia is still a member, so we are still trying to come to joint solutions for the security on the continent. And maybe it's even more important than the membership in the Council of Europe to have this channel of communication to prevent misunderstandings, to keep the lines of communication open. But that it doesn't refer to the geographic aspects, where I agree with everything that has been said.
Thank you. I think we still have time for 2 more questions. Yes, please.
Just a second.
Just a second to wait for the microphone, please.
Yes.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you. Thank you very much for all the members of panel 1 and panel 2. My name is Martin Ježábek, the Faculty of Social Science. I would like to ask one more question related also to the question of German business, because there are many links between German and Russian industry. This is not only the energy sector. I would like to ask, there is a completely new situation in 2022 for German business and for German companies. How they deal with it? I would say that it is really difficult to deal with this new situation in 2022. Thank you very much.
I guess this is the question for you.
I agree. It's and it's a very easy question, because the simple answer would be yes, it is very difficult for the German businesses to dismantle all the ongoing activities in Russia. There's a huge trend to leave Russia. Some of them are going to neighboring countries, others are coming back to Germany. We welcomed hundreds of Russian employees of German companies in Germany and in other countries. We are trying to of course, as a government, we have all the interest to protect our German companies, but I can tell you that it's sometimes very difficult to dismantle business, because you have to sell your assets, and sometimes the prices that you get are not very good. In the energy sector, I think the losses are huge. You know how intertwined the German and the Russian energy and businesses were. And this, of course, is sometimes painful for the companies, but overall, everybody agrees that this is the right thing to do, and that we have to face new realities and adapt to them.
Thank you. And we have a second question there.
Thank you very much. My name is Jiří Kirian. I work for the Central European Department of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I have one question perhaps to all 3 panelists. We speak about European order, and for the European Union, in order to be able to shape the European order to its liking, the European Union must have capabilities, must be able to do that actively. What is, in your opinion, needed for the EU to adopt, to gain, in order to shape it Is it more member states? Is it enlargement? Is it more soft power or public diplomacy? Is it more hard power and military capabilities? Or is it internal institutional changes? I would be interested in that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And let us start this time with Mr. Romancov.
Speaking frankly, I'm not an expert on EU and EU policies, etc. So it's quite difficult for me to answer this question. But nevertheless, I have read in one book that EU throughout the world is understood not as a superpower, but as a supermarket. And I think that it's very difficult for the supermarket to live in a world which is full of predatory great powers. So perhaps let's start to be something else than the supermarket.
Okay, thank you. Maybe you, Mr.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. I think all the areas you mentioned are important. I think the European Union has to, in its relationship to Russia and also to the neighborhood, concentrate on their soft powers. And I'm thinking about all these cooperation projects, be it Erasmus or everything else to reach out to the neighborhood, not to Russia at this time, of course. The hard power is also important. The European Peace Facility gives us the framework to help countries be more resilient and protect themselves, especially in the neighborhood of Russia. The enlargement, I'm grateful that you mentioned it to me, is very important. It's maybe even the cornerstone, especially with a view to the Western Balkans, but also with Ukraine, Moldova, and hopefully also Georgia will jump on this train, because this will give, of course, these countries not only economic prospects, but also bring us closer together in our possibilities to cooperate. But there's one more thing. On the institutional setup that you also refer to, this is the QMV, the qualitative majority voting. So we have to, in my view, get rid of the system that we can only take all decisions anonymously. So everybody has to agree. We see how difficult this is sometimes, but if we want to become more visible, more active player, then the European Union also has to find ways to introduce elements of majority voting.
Yeah, this is exactly the point where we slightly disagree with the German government, right?
Oh, I have to go.
No, I think that the question by Izzy was a good question for a diplomat, because he raised critical issues and he enumerated in a good order all of them. So
so you've agreed that beforehand?
Yeah, beforehand I'm seeing that he's mentioning so of course, yes, soft power is there. I think Europe is good at that, but needs to be better, especially in approaching the third countries, in speaking about the narrative, about explaining that war, what we are standing for. The hard power, here we are really not good at. I think Americans, they are telling us so long time that we are underestimating our defense capabilities. And frankly, I'm being shocked. I would dare to say that I'm shocked. That more than a year after the beginning of the war, we are, for example, producing not enough ammunition for our own defenses, and of course, including for the defenses of Ukraine. It's really incredible how slow we are. We should speed up. We should increase the capabilities, and we should concentrate on the hard power. This is the hard power which will defend our values. This is not the offensive striking force. This is a defensive force. We should be very serious about that. Enlargement, yes, of course. It will be a difficult process, merit-based process. It will maybe change the European Union, also the center of gravity of the European Union. So there will be plenty of discussion, especially in bigger states like Germany, about what will happen, what will be the shape of the European Union after countries like Ukraine, for example, join. But there will be the process towards this. And here, as Czechia, we are coming with a proposal. Let's make this process gradual. Let's make the process modeled in such a way that the countries which are aspiring to this final membership, on the way, they are already benefiting from that enlargement process. they can be part of the single market, they can, in a sectoral way, they can integrate. I think this will motivate them more to go and follow this path, which is long, in many countries painful, and there is a lot of internal politics, obviously. And now QMV. Well, Czech position, of course, is different from German. We are very reluctant to go with QMV for the CFSP and the high politics. Why? Mainly that the current shape of the QMV is giving much bigger say to big countries. So if you go this path, as a smaller countries, you have less say in the security, defense, and foreign policy. Now look at the situation from the beginning of that war. Who was at the front of the effort? Big countries or smaller countries? Who was the avant-garde? I'm not. This is not just. This may be just the example, but if you look at the history of EU enlargement, and we have a long record of different ways of enlargement, when there was not the enlargement by one country, but several countries, always you had a process of institutional reshaping, look at maybe the voting also, etc. And it was moving towards the QMV. But now we explored all this, or EU explored all this potential in low politics, and we are now at the ceiling of the high politics. And this will be very critical. I think eventually in the future, it would be possible at the moment when really the people, all the countries have a full trust that the big countries are taking the European interest in the field of security and defense as their own interest. And of course, as there will be more convergency of the assessment of the threat and these issues. So maybe we are maturing, and I frankly believe that the EU during the last year made a big leap in integration in the CFSP. All this unity which is demonstrated, the sanctions, it would be unthinkable many years back. And really now the EU is united, but still there is way to go, and maybe even this voting and the balances between small and big, etc., that should be part of the discussion.
Okay, thank you very much. Unfortunately, the time is flying, so I have to cut this very interesting discussion at this point. Thank you very much for joining us today, Michal Romancov, Jaroslav Kurfürst, and Matthias Lüttenberg. Thank you very much for your attention, for the interesting questions. I'm particularly happy that so many young people are here and many of our students. That is a great pleasure for us. And many thanks also to the German embassy, to our partners from the magazine Osteuropa, to my dear colleague Vladimir Handl for organizing this very interesting event. And I hope that we will have some follow-up discussions now in more informal environment. So have a good afternoon and hopefully see you soon.